Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. It's a little less chilly than it was yesterday, but it still doesn't feel like May to me out here, but that's the way it goes. I got thinking today, hey Terry, about last summer. Last summer was the first summer that we didn't have a family garden. Hey Kathy. We didn't have it because we were in the midst of getting our house ready to sell, and then searching for a new home and moving and starting a new job and all the things that go along with that. And so we weren't going to be there to harvest the things that we would have normally planted in our gardens, and we didn't really have the time in the early spring as we were trying to get ready for our move. To even think about putting seedlings in. Hey Heather. But Warren's back at it again this year. He's got his seedlings up, and they're doing great. He's got basil, and he's got chives, and he's got tomatoes, and he's got a couple of lettuces and a few other things. I can't remember what. He's in charge of the gardens, not me. I never have time for the gardens. And I'm looking forward to that here. We've been watching to see where the sunny places are on our new property and trying to figure out where we're going to put our gardens in. There's a lot of theological reflection that can happen in a garden, and I know that many of you probably are involved in that regularly, about things buried and things that seem dead and things that come to new life. Hey Heather, hey Sue, hey Carla, about the promise of hope, right? The planting of something and waiting with expectation and hope. There's all kinds of things about weathering storms and taking what life gives you and blooming where you're planted. There's all kinds of theological messages, ways of thinking about faith and ways of thinking about God and ways of giving us hope and endurance when we think about gardening. There's a whole book called The Spirituality of Gardening. There's probably 100 books about that, but that's definitely one that I know of from Woodlake Books. Hey Richard. But as I was getting ready to come on today, I subscribe to God Space with Christine Sign. She's a beautiful writer and a beautiful person who often provides poems that I've read on here and used in worship and other things. Hey John. And so she said today, and I thought it was really fascinating, the blog that I to read with her, that she follows Tomato Theology, and that was the first I had ever heard of Tomato Theology, but apparently it's a thing. And she talks about Tomato Theology and church reopening in today's blog, and so I wanted to share with you the wisdom that she has around that. And so here we go, Tomato Theology and church reopening, as we think about the possibilities, still just a possibility folks, not a reality, of opening our churches again. Here's what Christine Sign has to say for us. She says, don't plant too soon. We all know what happens when we put things out in the garden too soon, when we're not patient, when we don't read the signs in nature to know that things are going to thrive and be well. And so we end up with dead plants or with regret or with things that we have to struggle to keep going. And so don't plant too soon is her first piece of Tomato Theology for us as we think about reopening the churches. She also says don't plant too fast, which is different from too soon, right? Too fast. We all know that seedlings need a time of hardening off, right? They need a gradual exposure to the elements after the warmth of your windowsill and the sunshine that comes in and keeps them going. I know Warren started hardening off some of the tomato plants and some of the other plants that we have last week, but obviously that's not happening again now, and so we're probably going to have to restart that process. But yeah, don't plant too fast. A little bit at a time so that they don't get scorched by the sun, so that we don't stunt their growth, and so that the cold doesn't cool them off. And so a little bit at a time, don't plant too fast. Could mean smaller groups for churches and then larger groups and finally all of us together. But there's wisdom to be had in wondering about that too, about wondering what small groups will happen and when small groups will happen and if small groups should happen. There's some theology and some thinking about God in that too. Just because we can do something doesn't mean it's always the wisest thing to do or the most soul-satisfying thing to do or the most faithful thing or caring thing or loving thing or nurturing thing or whatever thing to do. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. Her third tip is don't plant too shallow, right? When she plants her tomato seedlings, she doesn't plant them sticking straight up in a row, which is the way I've always done it, and the way I've seen most people do it, and the way Warren does it. She actually plants them on their sides, so only a few of the leaves are coming up. And she does that to allow that whole stem to plant deep roots, for them to go deep. And so she buries the old growth to make way for the new growth. And I think that's a really lovely image for us to think about as we're beginning to wonder about reopening our church. What old practices, what old ways of being as a church do we want to bury so that we can make new life, make room for new life as we go forward. And I think that's really neat. She also says that we need to support our new tomato plants from the beginning, that they need lots of support. They need a building up and a nurturing of the soil and a strengthening right from the very beginning, or they're not going to thrive as they go forward. And that building up of the soil and the surrounding environments is the other piece, the last piece that she talks about. She says it's not enough to just put them in the ground, right, and wait and see what happens. It's not enough for us to just go back to the church and expect everything to be good. We need to add mulch to the soil. We need to put cages around the plants to give them something to support them, to hold them up when they're at their most vulnerable. We need to water them. We need to make sure that weeds aren't choking them out. We need to make sure that there are other things in the environment that can help them to live. So pollinators that can come and nurture them and help them to grow strong and faithful as well. And so I wonder, I think it's a really great way for us to think about coming back as a church, this tomato theology, which is something that I've never really thought of before, but I found quite fascinating and quite illuminating today. And so my friends, engage in a little reflection for yourselves as we think about coming back to the church. The newsletter this week will have some resources for you in thinking about that, and reminding you that it is going to not be soon. The United Church is starting to put out resources to help us think about what that might look like, and the executive is going to be having some great conversations about that moving forward too. But prepare your hearts and prepare your minds and prepare your souls and prepare your communities for the time that we will gather again, and what that will look like, and what your hopes are and what your dreams are, and what you're grieving, because it's going to be an interesting time as we start coming back together. Hey Scott, glad to have you on. And if you have any ideas for theological reflections that you're doing in your local days, in the things that you do each and every day. Yesterday I baked bread and wrote theology, and so that was a really great way for me to reflect and think about God and think about the holy and the ordinary. Maybe there's things that you're doing too that might become a piece of one of these moving forward. It's not that I ever have nothing to say. Those who know me know that I very rarely run out of words, but sometimes inspiration comes in handy from other people. And so if there's a question or a topic or something that you want to think about and reflect about and have a little conversation about on one of these chats, then I'm all open to hearing your suggestions. So be well this day. Remember to plant things, to plant hope, to plant resiliency, to plant justice, to plant love, and remember to remind yourself that you are in God's garden always, and that all of those things are available to you as you go through this day, and that we together create the garden, that we are the things that will support one another, we are the things that will sustain one another, that will encourage and pollinate one another. And so go into this good day knowing that you are loved and cared for. Be well. Bye.